welcome back to the modern life of the Audi RS4. This is episode 3, and it is entitled The Enthusiast Effect. Now, I like to think that most of us, when we approach a new car, we do the research. We try to understand what it should cost, and if it's a used car, what we should look for to make sure it's been properly maintained, service records, indicators on the car. And then we also try to understand, especially for cars like this RS4, these older high-performance cars, what it's going to take to maintain throughout its life. I like to believe that all of us want to maintain the cars that we buy so that the next user can enjoy them as much as we can. It doesn't always happen that way, but I like to think we all at least try. But I have found that as I've researched various cars to purchase, it can be sometimes difficult to get a very clear understanding of what those repair costs are, particularly with cars like the RS4, these more high-performance oriented cars that have gotten, I wouldn't say pretty old, but they're not necessarily new, right? And let me give you an example. In college, I bought a 3000 GT VR4. Now, I should have probably done more research, but I was in college, and that's what car enthusiasts do, right? When we're younger, we just buy it, and then we figure out the rest later. But as I began to do research on that car and troubleshoot some of the small issues that I had and make repairs and upgrades, I began to recognize that this car had a reputation for being unreliable, difficult to repair, and rather finicky. And I think if I had known that at the point at which I bought the car, maybe I wouldn't have bought it, or maybe I would have second guessed it, or maybe had a different price in mind. But the problem was I didn't necessarily have the same experiences that everyone on the message boards were having. Yes, it was difficult to repair. It had a lot of new technology and electronic type things that were kind of tricky. The engine bay was hard to work on. It was very cramped. But I didn't really find it to be unreliable. In fact, it never let me down. I let it down several times by not doing a repair correctly, not tightening a clamp or a bolt, or not putting something on, back on in the correct orientation. But the car never let me down, and it was pretty old. It had 98,000 miles when I bought it, and I sold it with over 120,000 miles. So to me, that was kind of a misrepresentation of that vehicle. Well, why does that happen? Well, I think it happens because, obviously, new cars, we don't have tons of data on them. We don't really know what they're going to be like to repair and maintain. But as the car ages and it starts to fall into the hands of people who are, I'll say, more enthusiastic about the car, not to say that enthusiasts don't buy new cars, and not to say that people who don't really care about cars drive old cars, but the people who are providing the info on message boards, for example, are typically enthusiasts who really care about the car, or at least care about the car somewhat. And as we get more of that data that gets propagated on those message boards, that's where we start to see differences of opinions based on experiences. For example, if someone goes out and makes a repair on a car, they may not have had the right tools, the right space, the right time, the right skill sets, the right parts. Maybe they had an issue with the stuck bolt, or something else was wrong. When those things happen, it's usually the car's fault, right? We blame the car, when really it really wasn't the car's fault. It was our lack of whatever, right, that caused that problem. And it's not our reputation that gets dinged, it's always the cars. And that's the kind of data that you have to sift through to try and understand, was this an accurate representation of this repair, or was it not? And there's certain cars are better than others for sure. The RS4, I think, is pretty good. I didn't have a ton of issues trying to collect data and get a general understanding of what it would be like to own and maintain this car. One area that's a little bit fuzzy for me, and this is kind of the biggest thing with this car, is the carbon cleaning. The engine, for a couple different reasons, collects a lot of carbon on the backside of the intake valves. And so most people recommend that you get it cleaned. Audi does offer the service, but they don't really recommend when it should happen. And so it's kind of up to the enthusiast community to decide what is the proper interval for the carbon cleaning. And if you do some reading, you can see estimates anywhere from every 10,000 miles to 50, 60, 70,000 miles. So which one is it? I haven't made my own decision yet. At the end of the day, the only thing that's suffering is a little bit of horsepower by having those 30 intake valves. It's not going to hurt the car, but obviously if I want to keep up to the very best of my abilities to maintain this car, then I'll have to decide at some point. Now, let me share with you a couple things that I've learned to do that have helped try to offset this enthusiast effect. And then we're going to apply those in upcoming videos to this car. For example, this car is going to go into the dealership for its 25,000 mile service next week. Will I be caught with some surprises? How am I going to address whatever I see in the repair bill? How am I going to approach and make good decisions? I'm going to try and apply some of these principles. So let's tackle a couple of them. The first one, I know it probably seems like a duh or straightforward, but you just do more research. You can't possibly research every aspect of the car before you buy it. Maybe you can if you've got a whole year or whatnot, but to address the intricacies of an individual car that you're trying to purchase, it's really hard to do all the research. So you have to do more research to get deeper and kind of sift through some of the muck, and you have to continue to do that research. You have to continue to ask questions, think of different scenarios to get you to a place where you feel like you have a good understanding. The next is to take your time. It's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to do all this research overnight. You're going to have to take your time. You're going to have to process. You're going to have to ask, again, questions, multiple message boards, YouTube videos, all the resources on the internet to make these decisions. But also, the next point is to ask the experts. Message boards and YouTube, they're not the only experts. Your dealership is a resource to you. You may not end up going there, but you can at least call them and get some feedback on what they're seeing with your particular car. Not so much for the RS4. My service advisor had only ever seen one before, so she wasn't able to give me a ton of feedback on the RS4 in particular, but I don't think that's going to apply to every car out there. Also, there are tuner shops, and there are websites that support these cars, like ECS Tuning, for example, is a big aftermarket supplier of parts for this car. Call ECS Tuning and ask your questions. Find local tuner shops that work on your particular car. Or maybe they're not local, maybe they're a reputable tuner shop within the country that works on your Subaru or your Porsche or whatever. Ask them. Get additional data points that are not just people on forums sharing their opinions. People who have actually seen the cars and worked on them multiple times. And finally, I think the most important thing is to be a bit cautious by nature. If you're not sure, then err on the side of caution. If you're not 100% sure you can afford that car, then just be cautious about it. Maybe you don't get it that time. Maybe you wait a couple more months and save up a bit more money. And by being cautious by nature, by having a posture of caution, if you do need to make a decision that's a bit less supported or a bit less cautious or a bit risky, you're more set up to make that decision because you've been cautious in the past. But if you keep making risky decision after risky decision, it's going to catch up to you eventually and the car is going to suffer. So be cautious by nature, by default, by posture, and then eventually if you need to make those decisions, you have the ability to do that. So that is my take on the Enthusiast Effect. Next time we'll again talk about dealership repairs on this RS4. See you next time.